Hi, I'm Jessica Adducci.
And I'm Nick Adducci.
So we're a very creative couple. I'm a screenwriter and he's an animator.
And she's a heck of a good producer.
I'm also a producer.
There's definitely a big difference kind of between personalities of like people who are geeks and people who are, kind of the more mainstream Christian church. It's actually, there's a lot more of that kind of personality type than not. Geeks tend to be a smaller number, but there's now a growing number of them, like you said. But I see value in both. Is kind of the perspective I want to come to, is like I see value in those who are I guess more conscientious and kind of doing that sort of thing, but and having hard work in the real world, and they're not as fired up, with
Grounded.
Yeah, they're not as fired up with things like going to read Lord of the Rings or watching the movie, because I mean it was fun when I showed that movie to my grandparents and stuff. They were like, you watch this? Like, it's how long is this? It's so it's like it's all not real. They would rather watch what they think is real, like gangster movies or something. So it's but and the thing is, I do see value in both, and that's maybe the way I would like people in the church to see people who are geeks as well. They have strengths. And maybe because they're not talked about so much, it's worth talking about. People who are geeks, like you said, they see stuff differently. And that's, I mean, it's got its bad points. You can like, hey, what if God was a woman? That's different, or that kind of thing. So, there's all kinds of interesting ways you can just creatively flip something on its head. But people who imagine things inspire people to take it on as if it was new. And that's what children do, actually. Children do that for us as parents. We have a 6-year-old, 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and they see things brand new. And they're, wow, what is that? Ooh, a baby bird. I want to look at that. Oh, that's so cute. I'm like, it's a bird. Like, I probably wouldn't have even paid attention to it if you weren't here to look at it. And when you get new Christians, you kind of get the same thing also. It's like, I've never read Moses before. It's like, well, let me tell you, there's some interesting. Moses is a wizard, by the way. He is a complete wizard. You look at everything he does. He has a staff. He's casting spells. Basically, actually, technically, in the D&D canon, he would be a sorcerer, or perhaps a warlock, actually. Might be a warlock because he's got a deity kind of powering him. So it's sort of like, anyway. But anyway, and it's awesome. Yep. It's better than most fantasy novels, really, when you think of the imagery. But I digress. I like to see people as the body of Christ. Like when geeks show up, you don't have to treat them like they're better or worse, really. They like to be included. That's kind of the big thing. Yeah. And I think geeks, because they've been kind of in the minority for a while, they sort of feel like they got a chip on their shoulder a little bit. And they're like, we're better than you dopey plebes who don't really get things. Okay, let me slow it down for you and use small words. It's they get a bit of that arrogant, vibe to it a little bit too. So I mean, they both have their things that can irritate each other, but we are different parts of the body. Just because I'm not an ear doesn't make me any less part of the body than the hand. The hand moves stuff, it's important. The ear hears stuff, that's important, and eye sees it. These are all important pieces. You are all, one body. Yeah. It's worth seeing each other as equally valuable.
Yeah. I think with the variations in personality, it and how outcast, I think both of our ministry to geeks or whatever, I keep putting everything in quotes, but it's because it doesn't feel real yet. Like it doesn't feel like an established thing that I can not use air quotes.
It's starting to get there.
Yeah. But I think it started with being outcasts and feeling like geeks are very much outcasts. And I mean, very much God true. Says to reach outcasts like that. That's a directive. So I think we both got very interested in ministering to the US in particular. We went on a mission trip to Haiti at one point before we got married. It's like testing ground for our marriage, and how we would work together and minister together.
Yeah.
And we both were there, and we enjoyed it, and we used the talents we have, and did a mission trip. But we both sat down not even that far into the trip, and we were just sort of like, the people, we both felt that the people we were supposed to be ministering to, reaching out to, or whatever, weren't in Haiti, and they weren't international, which is funny because we very much, that's a lot of the ministry work we do right now with our products. But it was in the US, and it's again, it kind of started with outcasts, and geeks are in that outcast circle. And just realizing, going to conventions and going to various game nights and just doing what we do, you start to understand how people feel about the church, and that in a lot of cases the church was the one that made them outcasts, and that they don't feel welcome there.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually I took a class called Perspectives that's primarily about international missions, which again, I felt outcast. I was like, why don't you minister to the US? So that was kind of I'm using my creative mind to kind of put ministry ideas together, mission ideas together. And so there are people groups or subcultures. I mean, we use subculture all the time. So subcultures and things like that, that they were talking about perspectives of how to reach those people, because everyone treats them like the main group, but in fact, their language is different, their customs are different, etc. Well, that just reminded me of geeks. So when it came time to write a paper, because I was taking it for a kind of credit, I wrote a paper on geeks and started to explore cultures. And what I found is a lot of what he's talking about, where we're just diametrically opposed. And it's weird that, in what church culture has developed from is more conservative, but socially speaking, I'm not talking politics or anything, but socially speaking, much more conservative. A lot of that has to do with what God says and what's in his, what's in the Bible, what's in his word. But the other side of that, the flip side, is they're the geeks, and they're very open-minded. I mean, you need that for creativity and imagination and everything else. And along with, a bit of church history going, oh, we can't make things too beautiful because that takes away from the worship of God and puts it onto the worship of the beautiful thing. The church itself, that conservative nature is just sort of taken over. And I found plenty of examples where people like us, like, go to church, follow Christ, like, do what you would expect mainstream churchgoers to do, as far as events in life and how you follow Christ, but also sat there and said, but I question a lot. I want to question a lot. I want discussions a lot. I want to, I want to engage.
I want 3-hour-long arguments with a panel of people who are not pulling punches about what they really think about these things, so that it actually is like, well, I heard that for an hour and a half, but I still don't think you answered the question.
Yeah, it's there. There was some encouragement. I mean, a lot of the stuff I learned about was US based, but there was a particular blog from a UK churchgoer. I'm pretty sure. I don't think she was a pastor of her denomination, but she was basically saying, I question. I want to question. It doesn't weaken our faith. It strengthens our faith. Because we explore, we get the answers, we dig into that. Like, I've always found the more I question, the deeper I dig, the more logical it all seems. I'm a very logical person. That's probably the sci-fi part of me. Like, I love logic, and it's all very logical to me. And God's never faltered on that, if you will. Like, whenever I've challenged those things, but in church, that's a dissonant part between the cultures, is being able to walk through a church and question, and there's respectful questioning. There's certainly a way to ask those questions, and not everyone is in the geek world. What?
Oh, that was just a fun thing. It's like, that's just a normal outgrowing of who they are.
Yeah.
This whole little bit about, like, geeks, I think the word is a bit broadened. Like it's also encompassed the nerds. It's also encompassed different things too. Geeks are people who are not they're not equipped with huge amounts of social graces. That's kind of part of who they are. They're a bit more narcissistic, and they got like
they're again, from the paper I wrote and the stuff I found, geeks like geek things. They're very specific. We're very specific. We like very specific things. And so if someone comes up and says, hey, I'm into football, as creative as we are and as open as we are, it's sort of like, that one's tough for me to go there. It's not one of my interests, you know, but to have specific interests and specific things in mind, that's part of it. Yes. I lost my train of thought from the previous part though. What was I talking about that made you think of that?
You were talking about how in churches, people they're not really allowed to question. And that was sort of my springboard to think like, well, naturally they would do that. And when the very natural thing they want to do keeps getting shut down, they're not going to want to come back.
Oh, definitely.
And it's like,
and that's essentially what's happened. You know, someone walks into a church with tattoos and which, you know, I'm tattooed. Where's the camera? There it is. Tattoos and piercings and different colored hair or whatever. I mean, the most superficial things, to be honest, that walk in, you kind of go, ooh. You see most of the church kind of go, ooh, what are you doing? You know, whatever. Or some friends of ours, I still remember a friend of mine really wanted to commit more to his faith. Huge geek, went to church, found a church after he moved, and started going to their Sunday school. Because again, geeks are very committed. So, and very like 100, 200%. And so he was like, oh, I don't just go to church. I'll go to Sunday school and I'll do the thing and I'll do that. And like committed.
Join every group, do all the homework.
Right. And so he joined the group and he sort of announced, and not everyone would, but he sort of announced in his Sunday school that he wouldn't be there the next weekend because he was going to Dragon Con in Atlanta. And one of the other people in the group was like, oh, a convention. What are you doing? Are you cosplaying? And she was like, you know what cosplaying is? Like there's immediate connection because of the shared interests. And while like Nick's right, it can be very broad, you know, the interests kind of pie chart or whatever. Typically the geekier you are, the more specific you are, like you get Trekkies all about Star Trek,
and
right?
There's the original series versus TNG versus Voyager versus Deep Space Nine versus new stuff.
Yes. You also have Star Wars, which Star Wars Celebration is going on right now. And I have friends that are just all about Star Wars, and that's it. They don't, you know, I wouldn't bring up anything else with them. It would be Star Wars.
They're not geeky about Pokemon or
no.
You know.
Actually, the person I'm thinking of is geeky about Pokemon, but anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Some people are broader, but a lot of them are deep,
very
focused,
specific,
very deep.
Yeah. And I think to bring things back around, hopefully, the more things are shared, the less dissonance there is. When Nick and I walk into a church, when he worked for a church and we walked into that church and said, this is who we are and these are the things we like, you could kind of get an immediate feel for things and whether they accept you or not. Again, God's behind you. God understands who you are and what you love and why you love it. You can walk in there very boldly and say, this is who I am, and offer things, offer creative services, and, you know, say, we love expressing who God is in a different way. We bring a different facet to things. We, you know, and if they're just sort of shut that down, we're in the practice of, because of who we are, we're in the practice of being able to go, okay, well, moving on, you know, or creating our own group. Like, you know,
used to be, okay, fine, I'll do it myself. There's like that kind of thing. So.
Bible study's not deep enough. Cool. We'll lead one. Fine. Like we'll do that. We'll take that on. So resolving some of those differences kind of feels like that sometimes, where, I mean, that's what geeks do, is they sort of start their own thing. Like you start your own D&D campaign, or we are leaders. I think quite often geeks are seen as mousy, whiny people, because there is some whine.
Give them one little bit of power in there.
but yeah, given the opportunity, they'll form, I mean, groups out the wazoo, and they love social groups. They, you know, that's what I was going to say. When you said something earlier, you said something about, you know, the social graces and everything. It's not a lack of social grace. I think that's a really hardcore misunderstanding. That may be something very important, is geeks are not anti-social. Some of them are, but all of them, you can't say all of them are. And actually the vast majority are incredibly social. You see it at conventions all the time. And it may be that the introverts just stay home. I don't know, but
or they keep their masks on the whole time and never break character. That's like
that's a way for an introvert to go to a con. But at the same time, like, I'm introverted, but I love discussing what I love. And when I love it so much, and geeks love what they love. And it's not antisocial, it's awkward social. Like, when it's someone who doesn't love what you love, and you don't operate in the same circles, you don't operate in the same world, you don't operate in the same headspace. That was something the church pastor, or the guy that was speaking in our church last weekend, I loved what he said about something when it's John and Peter going out together, and he was classifying who they are, how they were, and he said, you know, Peter was the rock. He was grounded. He was a fisherman. He was in the world, like reality or whatever. And he said, John's head was in the clouds. He was the dreamer. He was the mystic. He was, you know, his book is the most kind of mystical,
poetic,
and everything else.
The word was God, and the word was with God.
Right. Like that kind of language. And
Peter is very right. I'm going to use this sword. And I'm gonna
it's the shortest gospel. That's Peter.
Mark.
So but I think that's something that, coming from those two different worlds, it's hard for geeks to be understanding, just like it's hard for traditional churchgoers to be understanding. And it's hard to find those bridges, and it's hard to see that the way we talk about God, it's different. It's not wrong. It's just different. We see different facets of God, and we love to express those facets of God. And it's hard to find those crossovers, to be honest. I think a huge one, I would always circle back to sort of outcasts. I would circle back to, and that includes people who aren't geeks. Like,
I think you're hovering over the target with that one. This whole idea of reaching this subgroup in America rather than just America. It's like, well, there are outcast groups in America, and this is a huge one. This is like a whole continent, if you will. But like, considering gamers, there's like, I've connected with more people on mobile games like than I almost have through church. It's amazing. Like, people who are in Germany and Korea and various parts of the US. Like, I know this guy in Arkansas, and this one in Washington, and this one. It's crazy that connection can happen. Kind of how conventions work. People congregate together, and they actually have a lot of common ground to already share. And it's a great way to, you know, share the gospel with who you are connected with. I think traditionally we share the gospel, at least in the US. We share it by saying, you know, you're a sinner, which all of this is true. Again, it's just a different facet. You're a sinner in need of redemption. Repentance is part of that, and everything else. And in a geek's world, I feel like, to rephrase the crew side of things, you know, God has a plan for your life. That would resonate. That would say, wait, God cares about me? Wait, God, okay, hold on. What plan is that? Well, it's for you to walk with God. So you're talking to someone who's more open-minded spiritually, potentially, you know, you can walk with God. It's like, well, you claim to walk with other things, you know, or whatever. Like, being able to engage in that spiritual relationship there, and be able to say, no, God cares about you. He's cared about everything that's happened. He cares about his church mistreating you. He cares about your questions. He's up there. He's ready. He can take anything. I think one of the key things that I've used to tell anyone about Christ hasn't been, do you feel like you need someone to save you, or, you know, any of that. I don't get into that language. I get into, you obviously have questions. You have questions. You have doubts. You are trying to ask the church, or you have, about those questions and doubts, and they've not
they've not answered. They have not been equal to the task for whatever reason. Try asking God. Try asking God if he exists. Try asking, just ask with
and be open to the answer.
That's it.
That's
yeah.
Because
ask with a pure heart, right? Like if you genuinely want to know, he'll tell you.